and fixing those bags a while ago. I did not get out there. So appreciate all the help for doing that earlier before our services begin on this evening. Some updates. Some updates on the sick. I was given some information just a minute ago. J.C. Weeks' wife, Patsy, passed away, and as I understand it, Patsy will be buried Sunday. Now, the funeral will be at 2 o'clock Sunday at the First Baptist Church. And Scott, remind me again where the funeral will be at, where the burial will be at. Hillcrest. J.C. is one of the finest people you'll ever know in our community. I really like J.C. and his family, so our hearts go out to J.C. and our prayers for him. Also, Floyd Willingham Sr., as I understand, many of you know Floyd. I know Floyd personally myself, and found out he fell and broke his hip. Surgery tomorrow, is that what you told me, Nancy? Surgery will be tomorrow. And he's got pneumonia too at this time. And many of you know him and his sons, and they are good people within the community of Belgreen. Jeanette Johnson, please remember Jeanette. She has lupus, as I understand it. Please remember her in your prayers and the family. Also, remember Dolores. I know she's not here tonight, and she more than likely is still with her son Steve, who is not well at this time. As I understand it, just hanging on. Maybe I haven't heard anything lately.
We were there today.
And he is, where is Steve? Is he at home?
No.
On the hospice at Tupelo. Okay. Remember Dolores, the family, at this time. Scott, is anything else you know of that I've left off? Anybody have anything else you want to bring up or make mention of? Okay. Let's have our opening song, opening prayer, and then we'll start our lesson.
My Jesus knows when I am lonely. He knows each pain, he sees each tear. He understands each lonely heartache. He understands because he cares. My Jesus knows just what I need. Yes, he knows just what I need. He satisfies and every need supplies. Yes, he knows just what I need. When other friends seem to forget me, when skies are dark, when hope is gone, by faith I feel his arms about me, and hear him say, you're not alone. My Jesus knows just what I need. Oh yes, he knows just what I need. He satisfies and every need supplies. Yes, he knows just what I need.
Our dear, kind, loving, most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this wonderful day that we've had. Father, we thank Thee for this blessing we have received this day. Thank You for my sake. Father, we thank You for this opportunity to sit here tonight so that we can read the Word over and learn more about Your will for us. Father, we ask that You be Kenny as he teaches the lesson. And each of us will have part of the lesson, learn from Kenny, and we thank Brother Kenny for teaching this lesson. Father, we are mindful of those who are numbers that are sick. Please be with them and bless and comfort them. And those that were mentioned a few moments ago, announcements of Mr. Dolores Davis' son Steve, be with him, and Willie and family. And also, Father, be with the J.C. Week family this time when they're lost to love. Father, we are thankful for your son Jesus. Thank you, Father, for the sacrifice he made. Thank you, Father, for the hope of heaven that we have through him, with road peace. Thank you for the church, and especially this congregation, for your people here at this place. Please be with us. Help us, Father, to grow in our knowledge and understanding of the Word. Be the kind of Christian that you want us to be. And that we be able to go out in this community, teach those that are lost and bring them. Father, bless our efforts this coming Saturday, Founders Day, as we meet with people and pass our information with you. Father, we ask that you now go with us through the rest of this study, through the rest of our life. And I give up for the saints. I we pray.
Does anybody else need a sheet? Tonight's lesson? Okay.
Well, we are in lesson 3, a great leader for a great God, and this is where we're going to be picking up. We finished a couple of Wednesday nights ago with our last lesson. It took me longer than I really anticipated, and sometimes that happens. When you lay out something, you always think it a timeline as you work on it, and then sometimes that just gets away from you, and that's okay. Your lessons that you have is really not for me. It's something that I put together that's coming from a book that came from the Bible. So honestly, when we look at this, it is the Bible. It's a lesson that was given to us many years ago, and so there's probably nothing I can say any different or anything new that probably somebody hadn't already said. But as we come together, we try to study and we try to think about the things that was done before us and how we can improve our lives. It's not for my glory that we do these things, but to glorify God in this process. So tonight I've actually talked about, if you look on your sheet in the front of it, I've actually got some little arrows, and those are the ones we're going to have to look up and read. Those, and I'm not going to call on you to read. I've asked a couple of you, and I understand it's kind of hard to follow along with that, and I'm going to try to read those. But I've got some others that's in here, and we're going to follow along, and I'm actually in pages 19 through 24 in our book. This is one we've been on for quite some time, and the way it looks like we'll be in there for a little bit longer. And I do hope you've read over it and actually referred back to the Bible as we study this, because there's a purpose. There's a purpose in tonight's lesson. The writer of this book, if you read it, this chapter, he actually talked about, the main headings, when you look at it, the main headings talk about God cares. He talks about, first of all, you got to have compassion upon people and show them you care. Now we're going to talk about a great leader, and this is the main lesson here, is a great leader, and we're going to talk about just a little bit some of the characteristics, if you're a great leader, or what is a characteristic of a great leader. And you can think back on maybe some presidents that we had, and maybe a boss that you had, maybe somebody you worked with within a job that you had that you said, that's a great leader. And we're going to talk about maybe some characteristics there. But first of all, we're going to look at God cares. The second thing, God's wrath. God keeps His promises and in God's wrath. So there's three main headings for tonight that we're going to be studying within our lesson. So as I get to my introduction, if you follow along with my sheet, I have a little introduction that the book uses, but I'll kind of go over it and paraphrase a few things that the writer was talking about. So we look at the lesson. We're still on Moses, and Moses is going to be compared to Jesus Christ just a little bit. And I also talk about Moses as being that leader. Now Moses was handpicked by God. We know that. The Bible tells us that. He was handpicked. Now, Moses was not a leader on his own merit. He wasn't. As I mentioned last week, last 2 weeks ago, how that Paul was chosen on the road to Damascus. Paul, in my eyes, was tenacious. And I can see why God chose him. Just as a personal, because he was the type of person that just didn't let things go. He was a great persecutor, but when God turned him, he became a great leader for God. Now, with that being said, what did God see in Moses? Not for sure. So we're going to read a little bit about that. Okay. So Moses illustrates how redemption is centered in a man. The man is Jesus Christ. Like Christ, he was born under the dire threat of death, but was divinely chosen and preserved in Exodus 3, 7 through 10, and Acts 7 through 25. Now this is the writers paraphrasing what their take as far as Moses. So if you would, follow along with me as I read Exodus 3, 7 through 10. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people. Who's he talking to here? Who is God talking to here? And where is he talking to him at? He's talking to Moses, isn't he?
Burning bush.
In the burning bush, but where was that at? Anybody know? I'm getting a little more specific. Actually, we're going to bring this up, according to the writer, even in the next chapter, because I've kind of got ahead of myself. I think we're going to find out he's actually on Mount Sinai. And I could be wrong about this, but I think as I read it, he's already there, according to the writers of this book, that he was already on Mount Sinai, where the burning bush was, to the point, you're right, he actually, when God spoke to him through the burning bush, which we'll be getting to in the next chapter, he doesn't even look at it. He's afraid to look at it. And then, of course, God calls him and says, Moses, Moses. And then that's when he turns and look. And God knows he's got him when he turns and look, according to the writer. So, as I go on about my reading, he said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people, which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Now, the one thing that stuck with me as I read this, of course, as I read through the whole book of Exodus and some chapters after that, it talks about God actually presenting himself. And of course, Moses will going to have to, at some point, go back up on the mountain and meet with God periodically. And it was kind of stunning to me to know that God actually, now not physically shown himself, but was present in Moses and to the Israelite people, but he was in the tent, and we're going to be getting that, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but he was in this holy place, in the most holy place, as we talk about that. So that was, to me, the first time I can remember that I had read that, and I really haven't seen that after that, but certain people, as we read about this, will be able to enter into the most holy place, and we'll talk about some that were not and why later on, but that was, to me, very interesting to read about what it would look like, what it did look like when God appeared as a great cloud.
When the presence of God enters that place, later on it's going to leave that place.
That's right. And that was real interesting to me to know that, because this is the first time I've ever read this, and I could just missed it, where God made himself physically present in a place. And he says, I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. I don't know if that's physically, spiritually, but he's doing it through what means? Well, through this leader, and that's going to be Moses. And he goes on and said, and bring them up out of the land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place where the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites. Now, I've read this multiple times. If you've been following along with me, the last couple of times I've got to speak, this verse is keep referencing back. To me, it is a theme verse. It's something that is telling us about the whole Exodus, the laying the groundwork of the beginning, in other words, the beginning of this time, getting them out. Now, we already knew how they got there because we went through that a few chapters ago, a couple of chapters ago. We know how they got there. Now it's time to come out and lead his people out of bondage. He said, and I'm going to skip on that, said, because the Egyptians oppressed them. Now it says, come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh. Now, when I heard that and I read that to myself, I was thinking about Moses, what's going through his mind. He fled Egypt. He fled Egypt because he was afraid. God is telling him that you're fixing to go back and meet Pharaoh. Now, I don't know in his mind if he's thinking this is the same Pharaoh or not, but we know Pharaoh died out and a new Pharaoh came up, according to the writing. So I can imagine at this point in time, Moses in his mind is already forming these excuses why I can't go or why he couldn't go. And we're going to be seeing it just in a moment. Now let's look at Acts 7:25. It says, for he supposed his brethren would have understood that God by his hand would deliver them. But they understood not. Now that goes hand in hand with what we just read, because remember, Moses was thinking, his first misconception, this is going to be on my timetable. You're telling me to go get them, and I'm going that way, and I'm going to get them. And that's kind of the way I look at it. But we know in God's way of handling things, it takes centuries, millennium sometimes, to get things done. He may make a promise, but you look at the people he promised already, the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he said, I remembered that promise. Well, you know, he never forgot the promise, but it wasn't on his timetable. And so that's the way I took this as I read it. Look at the very bottom bullet there. It says, after reading the entire book of Exodus, it's hard not to understand how Moses was a great leader. But also have to understand that Moses was not a perfect man. He wasn't. We all know that. You're human. Was Jacob a perfect man? He was a deceiver, wasn't he? But God blessed him. He had to wrestle with the angel till he did bless him, but he did get blessed. So the books of the Bible is going to talk about men all the time. We talk about with Solomon, David, the man after God's own heart. When we read about David, the sins that he had. Nobody's perfect, but it's not about being perfect. It's about working toward perfection and asking forgiveness, correcting those sins, and moving forward. So when we look at this, I'm on page 6 now, the top of it. He said he stated multiple times through the book of the shortcomings. He didn't feel equipped to lead the people in the beginning, and we noticed that as some of the writings that talked about the excuses. Now, next chapter that we get into, we're going to get into all of his excuses that he's going to make. And I'm not going to get into it now because that'll get into my next lesson. But we're going to talk about all excuses that Moses puts up before God why he can't do it. Now you can imagine God is a merciful God, but he's also long-suffering because he has to sit and listen to all those. And knowing he is going to have to go the whole time. But what, in my mind, I think Moses was trying to convince himself, not much God, but convince himself that he couldn't do it. And we're going to see that they ended up. Now, also, is going to see that he's going to pretty much promise him, it's a done deal. All you got to do is go and get the people out. Well, again, this goes back to Moses' frame of mind. I think I'm just going to go over there. We're going to walk out of Egypt. Not going to be a problem. That's not going to happen. So look at it. The next bullet says there will be a direct relationship between Moses and Paul. I've already used that a little bit about Paul. And look at Corinthians 15:10. It says, by the grace of God, I am what I am. And that was Paul. Paul had many writings in the Bible. Looking back on Paul and the number of times he was in prison or beaten or whipped and left for dead and narrowly escaped, and he never wavered on what he was trying to do, even to the point of death when he got sent to Rome. So Paul was tenacious in my mind. I keep bringing that up, but that's the way I look at him. Okay, so let's look at something just for a second. It talks about, it's noted that Moses was a great leader because he was a great follower. So I got to looking and I jotting down. So some of you that want to give me an attribute of a great leader, what would one be? A great leader. You may think of somebody in your mind, but what would be one thing that would come to mind if you're a great leader? First one I had is a great listener. Dictators don't always work out, do they? We found out, and I go back and I looked at a little bit the difference between the two Pharaohs. Think about the two Pharaohs, one with Joseph and this with Moses. The Moses Pharaoh, in my mind, he kept thinking back of being a dictator, oppressing the people. And then on the other side, you had another leader of Pharaoh, Joseph, at his time, that actually employed somebody to do his work for him. He didn't, it comes back to one of the second attributes. You got to be somebody that you can delegate. You can't do it all by yourself. You never will. In the church, Scott knows this, you can't do it all by yourself. You got to have people helping you all the time to do it, whatever that is. So you got to be a great delegator. The Pharaoh of Joseph was a great delegator. He had a great leader in Joseph. Joseph knew what he had to do, and he did it. And of course, the Pharaoh and all the people of Egypt, the people of Israel at that time, all of them benefited because of that. So a great leader is also somebody that delegates. Anybody else got anything you want to throw in there? Compassion. I thought that I had that one written down. Compassion is somebody who feels compassion toward the people and helps people. We always like that. Somebody's knowledgeable. You might not know it all, but you got to be a little bit knowing of what you're trying to do. I thought about one of my favorite presidents, Ronald Reagan. That's just mine. He had a lot of good attributes, I thought. He was a great speaker. To be a great leader, one of the things is a great communicator, great speaker. By the way, that's what they said about Hitler too. You know, motivator, get up in front of a crowd, get them riled up. That's what great leaders do, good or bad. And you've got to have that attribute to be able to do that. So, what was Moses' excuse he couldn't? What was one of them? He couldn't do what? He said, I'm slow in tongue. He's using that as an excuse already. And he probably was. I don't know what that meant. I don't really know what that meant exactly, but I take it as he was slow in speech. Probably not able to do that. So that's another one. And I always had, to me, in my job, you got to be approachable. People got to feel like they can come to you and talk to you. If you go back to the Pharaoh, again, of Moses, who probably wasn't approachable, according to what we've read so far, in my mind. That's what I look at. So, I also had some other things, and we can go and list several, but Moses was not all those. He had to learn a lot, didn't he? We already knew that he had spent 40 years in Pharaoh's house. He spent 40 years in the wilderness, and then we're going to be, the next 40 years, what he's going to be doing. Probably the hardest 40 years is going to be the last 40 years. Not only are you the guy that was sitting over here following, which, like I've told y'all, it's easy to sit out there until you get up here. But when you become the leader And you got to constantly solve problems. Matter of fact, one of the writings we'll find out that was mentioned in Moses, that he had to try to solve problems through the crowd all the time. And he had to delegate that. Somebody finally told him, you want to delegate that. I think it was his father-in-law told him that. So we'll look at that later on too, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so let's look, if you would, I'm going to read Exodus 2:23 through 25. Let me get over to where I'm at. Scott, you got it. You care to read it?
And it came to pass in process of time, the king of Egypt died, the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. They cried and cried unto God by reason of the bondage. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them.
When I read that, I was trying to, in my frame of mind, think about why. If the Israelites were in bondage and treated terribly, why did they cry out? And I don't totally understand that. Why did they cry out when this terrible ruler died? I don't know the answer to that. Some of y'all that have the answer, but in my mind, I'm thinking it's the unknown. It could get worse. We spent this amount of years, and believe it or not, there's actually a thing called Munchausen's, where captors are captured, and over a period of time, they're actually afraid to leave. It's a disorder to where they've been trained, even though they're abused, they're afraid to leave. They don't want to leave. It's hard to get them to leave, even though it's a bad situation. So that kind of brought that into my mind when I read this about the people of the Israelite nation. Don't know a lot about the next Pharaoh, but probably not much better at this point. So God heard their cries, and he remembered the covenant. So let's look now. God cares. This is the first heading. It says, God is all-knowing, God. Matthew 10:29 through 30 says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? Well, first of all, I had to look up what a farthing was. Now, I looked up, I knew it was not much. According to one of the dictionary, it said very little is a coin that worth basically nothing. So one, and whether this is exact or not, said one writing said it actually was about 1/8 of a 1 cent. And Scott, you may have something you want to add to that. That's what I had. Which we know today, pennies are just about worthless. They tell us it costs more to make a penny than it's penny. I don't know what it costs to make a penny, but they say it costs more to make a penny than it's worth. Penny's not worth much today, is it? Especially inflation. Sir?
I still pick them up.
You still pick them up? Well, yeah, and
I used to have tokens too.
if you don't pick them up at school, they get in the vacuum cleaner and they ruin the vacuum cleaner for the gym, so you better pick them up.
We used to have tokens.
Tokens? Yeah, that's true. I don't know what the worth was, but
Very little.
and of course, as time went, it used to be, and what I know a little bit about coins, the coins were based on amount of money. Well, that amount of money was backed up in gold. I don't know if it's even done that way anymore. Matter of fact, if any of you know anything about our society today, you know what they're wanting to get to, don't you? Bitcoins. What we call, really, I call it Imagine coin. Some of you may have stock in that. I don't. I don't do that, and I don't have any stock in any of that, but there's a lot of people that looks toward that. And matter of fact, nations, I don't know, they talk about mining a Bitcoin. I have no idea what that means to mine a Bitcoin. Some of you do, you can elaborate, but I'm kind of getting off the lesson, but I don't know what that means, where you get your money, who's going to pay you for it when you get it. I don't know. Okay, so reading on to this one, he said, sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your father but one, I'm getting a loss here, but the very hairs of your head are numbered. And what I took from this, God's all-knowing. There's not much, there's nothing that He doesn't know. The grains of the sand on the beach, the ocean, the hairs of your head. So God is all-knowing. We know that. So God is a merciful God. He's a caring God. He knows everything. So when we get down now, let's look at Exodus 20 and 2 and 6. And actually, we're very close to that now. So I'm going to read that one. Y'all bear with me as I have to look them up. Exodus 20, verse 2 and verse 6. Verse 2 says, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And verse 6 says, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. You're going to hear that verse and that phrase said a lot about keeping my commandments, loving Him and keeping His commandments. Because first of all, He says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. But you're going to see the Israelite nation, the ones that were coming out, they didn't even clear the gate, in my mind, till they was already griping. Moses, here you have brought us out to die in the desert. Moses, here you have brought us out where the Pharaoh's going to capture and kill us right here in the desert. And it was constant, the complaining. So when I look at this and I read this, I thought about the griping and complaining that he had to listen to. As a matter of fact, we're going to see this unbelief is what's going to keep them out of the promised land. The writing tells us that. These people will not see the promised land. And we already know Moses will not enter the promised land. Now, he's granted to see it, but he's not going to get into it. All right, so now let me read another verse here. I'm going to go on to Exodus 33 and verse 19. And he said, I will make all of my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. I'm going to read, go past that to chapter 34 in Exodus. I'm going to read verses 5 through 7 on this case. I'm actually going to back up one before 6 and one after 6, because I thought that was important. Exodus 34, 5 through 7. And the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and upon the children's children, unto the third and fourth generation. So, when we look at all this, we talk about the compassion. Now, I'm going to bring up something just in a minute, but let's talk about the compassion God had. And remember, we're talking about God cares at this point. This is what he's talking about, God caring. Well, look, I put a little note right under that. God showed mercy, and we've not even read that yet, but I'm going to bring it up. God showed mercy when Moses, remember, Moses goes to Mount Sinai for 40 days, I believe it is, and speaking to God. And while he's up there, the people are down below, the Israelites, after they've done all this for them. They're actually taking all that gold they brought out. If you read the prophecies before the people were let out, it actually talked about the people would be coming out of Israel wealthy. Of course, they gave them the gold. Now they're taking this gold, putting it together, and going to form a golden calf to worship, while Moses is on Mount Sinai worshiping or talking with God at this point in time. And there's actually some other things we'll bring up, but that's just a gist of what just happened. So, You can imagine now in God's mind, he knows this is going on. I don't know if Moses knows it's going on yet. And then talks about he's just going to wipe them out. And so God is going to Moses is going to beg God to spare the people. And he doesn't argue with him. He debates with him. But if you do this, what will the Egyptians think? And so when I read this, I thought, first of all, God cared. Second of all, God's merciful. Because it would be hard not to, for everything he's done for them, the people that he had, not to wipe them out and start over. Because that's really what he wanted to do, according to the writing. Anybody got anything you want to add so far, bring up, or add to what I've said? I was going to try to get finished, but I don't think that's going to happen tonight. Okay, I'm going to try to finish this section, and we'll stop here for the night. So let me keep moving. The New Testament writers teach us the same God has compassion and mercy. We as Christians will struggle with life, but we know God is in control. Note 1 Peter 5 and 7. Casting all your cares upon him, for he careth for you. You know, sometimes in life, life is hard. As an adult, and I know as kids, as we grew up in college and in high school, even before that, we thought it was hard. We just didn't know what hard was yet, did we? Because we hadn't got there yet. And I kind of use this example, even with my own kids, when you pay a lot of their bills as they're growing up. And little by little, you start turning that bill over. Or, now that's your job to do that. Or this is your job to do that. And they say, you mean I got to pay that insurance? I got to pay for my cell phone bill? I got to pay, yeah. You got to pay your own rent. You got to pay this. And so it's a life experience when you understand as a human being, as an adult, the job that we have, and now we got to do all that. We got to maintain life. We got to pay our taxes. We got to be a good citizen. We got to worship. And of course, we got to be a shining light in our community. And that's hard. It's hard to be a good adult. It's easy to lay up in bed and sleep and not work and draw whatever. And but that's not life. You know, I got to be productive. So when we look at things, and I looked at this caring God that we have, and how he has worked toward, and all this lesson has been, is showing how he cares for his people. Now, later on in life, we're going to see the Israelites were his people. But eventually, what's he going to do? He's going to, it's everybody. Everybody's his people. And that's going to be coming out later on as not in the near future, but we're going to see how God, not only to the Gentile, but to the Jew also, and to the Gentile, had that ability to do that. And that's going to be a stumbling block, as we see in the New Testament. It's going to be a stumbling block for the new Christians, isn't it? Because they still going to fight Paul on that, tooth and nail, the whole way out. Matter of fact, they're going to try to kill him over it. So, God is a caring God. At this point in time, we're going to stop right there. We're going to mark that spot as we pick up next week. And Scott, I'll apologize again. It's not moving as fast as I want it to, but we'll get it done. Let me read it. I do thank you for your attention. Ralph, you want to, got a song number you want to bring out? 313. I'm going to ask just in a minute, Brother Scott, if you'll come up and offer the invitation, but I appreciate your attention that you've given me. Like I said again, Scott mentioned it, you learn more up here than you do back there, but I appreciate all the attention you've given me. I'll try to do better as I go along with this. It makes it a little bit difficult at times to pull everything together. Scott?
sold for a farthing. Luke chapter 12, again, it says that 5 sparrows were sold for 2 farthings. One extra. 2 for 1. 5 for 2. 1 extra. We would say in our talking, that is just thrown in for boot, to sweeten the deal, to entice the sale. The point of all that is, even that 5th bird, that 5th one that was just for boot, that to the owner was considered to be worthless, is still known by God. And then he bounces off of that very thought and says, hey, even the very hairs of your head are numbered. But it's interesting, before that in Matthew 10, and also in Luke 12, by the way, before that discussion about the sparrows, the point is this. You don't need to just fear a person who can body. You really need to fear the person who can destroy both body and soul in hell. And he puts it right off of that into the discussion about God caring for us. Fear, but remember God cares. I think that's a great motivation, ought to be for us. We have to fear the one who can destroy both body and soul. We have to understand that God cares for us. He wants what's best for us. And as King mentioned tonight, it talks about love and obedience going together. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. But the very God who cares for us, if we do not love him and keep his commandments, he has the power to destroy body and soul in hell. The invitation song has been chosen, everything's in place. You're not a Christian this evening to assist you become a Christian. Repent of your sin, confess faith in Jesus, be baptized, and have your sins washed away, and rise in the news of life. Having done so, live that faithful life. And we mess up, fess up to God, and let that blood continue to cleanse us from all our iniquities as we walk in the light. Can we assist you for the best of y'all tonight, stand and sing.
Bring Christ your broken life, no more by sin. He will create anew, make whole again. The rifted wasted years, he will restore, and your iniquities remember no more. Bring him your every care, if great or small, whatever troubles you, oh, bring it all. Bring him the haunting fears, the nameless dread. Thy heart he will relieve, and lift up thy head. Blessed Savior of us all, almighty friend, his presence shall be ours unto the end. Without him life would be our dark, our drear. But with him morning breaks, and heaven is near. 222 is the closing song. You ever sing this song, would you mind having a closing prayer? If I walk in the path